Hello. Yeah, it's working now. Thank you so much for that introduction. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I wasn't sure whether to stand or sit, but as I've got this lovely chair, I will sit. And hi, panellists, all of whom I shall introduce in a moment. But anyway, welcome to this panel session focusing on the shifting impact of climate changes on our environment and, of course, ultimately our industry. It's clear that as an industry we are directly impacted by environmental issues such as tourism, water availability, the remodelling of coasts all over the world, extreme temperatures, we've seen that this summer, and the changes and the emergencies that these bring. A weather crisis that touches every part of tourism, from the destinations and communities that travellers want to discover to the confidence of the consumer to travel there at all in the first place. Tourism actors not only need to reinvent the model of tomorrow, but the education and the marketing of today. Indeed, the action of today, as you will find out as we discuss the issues now. So in the next 45 minutes, and I will be quite rigorous with time because I'm aware that we are running over, we'll be discussing which areas will be most affected over the next decade and how global tourism will be impacted via short, mid and long-term perspectives. So I'm delighted, sorry to keep you waiting panel, but I'm really delighted to introduce a really esteemed panel today. We have with us remotely Linden Coppell, who's Director of Sustainability, MSC Cruises. We have Pascal Viroleau, a CEO of Vanilla Islands. We have Jeremy Smith, co-founder of Tourism Declares a Climate Emergency. We have Raj Gyawali, who's founder of Socialtours in Nepal. And we have Mafalda Borea, who's co-founder and CEO of Attainable First. Apologies for any mistakes in name pronunciation through that list, but a really great panel, and let's crack on. So, Jeremy, might I start with you? And if you could just set the scene for us in terms of the consequences of climate change on the industry, and if we could perhaps touch on just which areas will be most affected over the next decade and how that will impact on tourism.
Thank you, Claire. I hope you can hear me. I'm certainly struggling to hear you quite significantly, so I hope I'm coming through okay.
You are, we can hear you.
Is that a yes, you can hear me? Or?
It's a yes.
Good, thank you, because we can't hear you. So I'm sort of hoping that I can. But I did hear that you asked me what the consequences are for the industry and where is going to be most affected. And I think we don't really have to do much predict and provide to imagine where the consequences are. I mean, we only had to look at right now and the summer we've all been experiencing. I mean, I took holidays from where I am in France through Italy, through Spain, across to Greece, and every country I went through was suffering unimaginable wildfires. While I was in Italy, it was the hottest day Italy had ever experienced. It hit 48 degrees in southern Italy. This changes the ability for the Mediterranean, the place we go in the northern hemisphere for our summer holidays, to host summer holidays. But that's just the Med. I mean, it's wildfires across America, across Siberia. We've seen rain in Greenland. And of course, the islands of the Pacific and elsewhere continue to be some of the most affected places of all, and so on. And then places around the equator and the tropics are becoming unlivable. Madagascar, one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my life, has a drought and famine going on that should be on the news every single day. It would have dominated the news cycle in the sort of era of Live Aid, but it hardly gets a mention. And so it's sort of everywhere, to be quite honest. And how are we impacted? Well, I mean, we are an industry that wants to take everyone everywhere. And I think how we're impacted kind of depends on how we respond. And we need to act with the urgency that an emergency demands. I mean, if your house is on fire, you don't sit around planning a 10-year strategy to address fire prevention. And the slower we act, the more we'll lose and the more we'll have to do in the long term, that's, heavy. I mean, it's not an easy place, a heavy conversation, but there are, people say, well, what's the silver lining? And I mean, there is a silver lining, and the silver lining is that if we act correctly, if we respond appropriately, we get a less polluted planet. we get richer biodiversity, and we get lesser inequality and healthier people. And these are people who will want to go on holiday, and they'll want to go to the places that have richer biodiversity and is less polluted. And so in the long run, by protecting the planet, we protect ourselves.
Sure. So in terms of how we act now, tourism activities, for example, and Jeremy, if we could just stay with you for this, should we be limiting those activities in destinations that are most at risk and those that are focused focused on those in need of regeneration? Jeremy, can you hear me?
I can hear you. It's a bit of an echo, but I'm sorry, you asked me what should we do about those places most at risk, and what should we do about those places most in need of regeneration? How do we seek a balance? And I think it's not necessarily that there is places at risk and places in need of regeneration. I think that those places at risk are often those places most at need of regeneration, and we shouldn't sort of parcel it off into something. Further than that, we talk about limiting things, but I mean, we need to, tourism is a very complex industry full of a remarkably large number of things. I mean, any of us who try to understand our emissions understand how complex it all is. But so what activities are we actually talking about limiting? I mean, if the activities are damaging, then of course they should be limited. I mean, if I go to the doctor and there's something bad for me, he doesn't say, carry on doing it, maybe do a bit more. He says, you need to limit doing that, or you need to cut it out. On the other hand, if the activities of tourism are sustaining, if they're regenerative, then we shouldn't be limiting them necessarily at all. We should be looking at the ways we can promote and support and increase. So it's not necessarily limiting tourism so much as working out how tourism can be regenerative, how it can support those places. And how do we go about doing that? Well, to begin with, science. I mean, science tells us what impact we're having on the atmosphere, on biodiversity, on polluted oceans, on stocks of animals, biodiversity. So we look to science, so we be guided by science. Beyond that, just as we look to science because it's the base of knowledge, so we look to the other base of knowledge, and the people who are most likely to have the most knowledge about what matters in a place are the people who are most affected by it, the people who live in that place, the most vulnerable people to the impacts. So just as we used to talk before COVID about how we were going to be more sensitive to the needs of our communities and listen to them, because that was the way we addressed over-tourism. Or so again, when we look to the climate and biodiversity emergencies, we start by going to the places and asking them, the communities, what they need.
Raj, you have direct practical experience of this, don't you? Would you like to just talk about how you have responded? A couple of examples.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Oh, that was much clearer now. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you great, yeah.
So from the global perspective that Jeremy gives, about how we need to respond to this emergency, I mean, on the ground, really, I mean, it's about tourism actors really trying to, like you said, working with communities, but then developing the experiences, that will suit the current climate, the current situation at hand. But, with this sort of crisis, there's always a change in behavior and we can see that now. People are much more concerned about the environment. There's more interest in organics. There's much more, people are much more aware of this. And the way that we need to respond in the destination is to try and adapt our experiences to actually, to work with that. I mean, I'll give you an example. In Nepal, we've been working with a community that was actually affected also because of COVID, but also because of climate change. I mean, both of it coming together. Also, somewhat mass tourism as well, that they had actually already stopped agriculture in their area because tourism was going on so well. They were just importing all the raw materials, all the food that was going into the food value chain. And after this break that came because of COVID, they've actually started rethinking about regenerating old traditional practices of agriculture. And if that starts happening, it's much more sustainable. It is actually regenerating old mechanisms. It's bringing back organics. It is also fulfilling the current demand. And all we need to do is to now not just take it as a passing fad, but also use it to our advantage to actually do the right thing. And I think this is just a matter of will and, not just sitting back and saying, what worked will work now. It won't. So we just need to adapt, change, and take it forward. And once we start doing that, we'll be making the right moves, really.
Sure. Mafalda, you're a big proponent of education, but how do you make sure the goals are specific and attainable? I mean, in the field, I guess Raj is able to react, and with science, we have very specific goals. With education, how do you make sure it isn't just wishful thinking? We can't hear you, Mafalda. Mafalda, are you on mute? Could you just check?
I mute myself. Sorry. Here we go. I hope you can hear me now. Claire, thank you so much for having me. I'm so sorry that I'm not there. I'm Portuguese and my dad is from Évora, so I'm really sad that I'm missing out. But back to education, yes. I really am a strong believer that education is key. And it's key at all levels, not just the industry, the stakeholders, which is something that Pascal was mentioning in one of the sessions earlier, but everybody, the decision makers, and of course the youth. I mean, especially them, they need to have access to the right scientific information and data. They need to be able to dream of the future that they want to live in, and then once they have that vision, they can build their lives and move in that direction, hopefully preserving the world that they live in. Something that we focus on a lot at Sustainable First is on the storytelling of the impact that the businesses and destinations that we feature have on the local communities. And it's such an important angle that Jeremy and Raj and you were just mentioning. These local communities, they really need to be engaged in the planning. They need to be involved in the planning of what impact these hospitality projects or businesses that pop up in the local communities will have on them, be it positive or negative. And I think that's key, that public-private collaboration needs to take place so that everyone is working towards the same goals.
Thank you. And so, Pascal, perhaps you could talk to us about how the industry can learn and share best practice of applying these goals. I mean, we've heard earlier today in several sessions that phrase "competing together." So, how can the industry share best practice of these goals and to different and kind of disparate destinations around the world?
Thank you. First, I want to thank you for giving me the floor and give me the opportunity to answer this question. I'm going to tell you a glimpse of what is done, of what you can find within the industry on this topic. I would say that you have 3 steps: is to learn and search for information, then to adapt them, to apply them, and of course, at the end of the day, to share what you have done, to share the best practices. To learn the practices, I would say that it's the most easy thing to do. You have your own research. Most of the time it's done over the internet. You have many information. You just type any word and you'll find any kind of information that you are searching for. But apart from this, you have some places where that will be very useful and where you'll be able to find the information. First, I'm thinking of the trade association or the unions, like Hotels Association, Car Rental Association. They all have a network on the local, regional or national level, international level as well. So they can all share information and give you something that is done somewhere else, not only in your own country. So this is a good source of information, the Trade and Union Association. Apart from this, something not to be missed is I would say the public organization like tourism boards, tourism offices. They all have now guidelines on where to go, what to do, what not to do. So you have to be involved with them and engage with them as well. So this is another good source of information. Some of the person and some of the companies in the industry are going for a label. or certification. I'm thinking at the Green Key or any of them. So this is as well a place where you can have these practices that have been done and tried somewhere else, anywhere on the earth, I would say. And at the top level, you have the international organization. I'm thinking at the UNWTO, so the United Nations World Tourism Organization, and of course the United Nations itself. They have dedicated platforms that are really useful, very insightful. So I can give you the advice to go there and to see what they have done. It's not only these platforms. They have also created some apps, mobile apps, like SDGs in action. You can download and have a look at what you can see, as a worldwide stage, what is done, not only on the industry, but also not to be business centered on other industry, not only on the tourism. So as I said, this is the most easy thing, is to learn and search for information. What is more difficult is to share, because if we are talking on tourism, we are talking on business. So it means that every company wants to earn money. They are investing, even when they are searching. It means that they are investing time, and if they apply, they are investing money as well. What they can do to share is, of course, to use the same platform that they found for learning. So to have this information, they can use the same, like the platform and the app that I was telling before. And as I said, as they are investing, they are searching for a return on investment, because they are searching for a competitive advantage over their competitors. So this is why it's not easy to share. But what I can say that at the end of the day, even if it's difficult, now it is compulsory. It is compulsory because, now everyone on the earth have heard of SDGs. They have heard of sustainability. I mean, all of this now is on everyone's mind. So people are now waiting for something to be done from their provider. I mean, provider, I'm thinking of provider of service, of product like hotels, car rental, anything. So everyone, every customer now are searching for proof of what is done. And if the provider is not doing or not showing something, it means that it will be out of the market quite quickly. And for me, if they have to share, sharing is showing, or showing is sharing. So they have no choice but to share. If they are not doing, they will be out of the market. It's like if you are in a big city, you are renting an hotel room, and if you don't have now a bathroom in your room, people will talk about it, and very soon you'll be out of the market. So I think now, if you don't have this SDGs implementation, sustainability implementation, and if you are not sharing and showing, you'll be out of the market.
And I suppose that's a big driver for any corporation or company, but it isn't still the reality, is it? I mean, that a sustainable approach is still, been talking about it across the last 24 hours, is still seen for many as a nice to have. And I think, to pick up your point about trade bodies, they've got they're a mixed bag, really, aren't they, in terms of how they approach sustainability. And so, Linden, can I put this next question to you? I mean, I know that you are, for example, a member of MSC is a member of CLEAR, for example, and possibly other trade bodies. How do we convince these bodies to instill these as corporate goals in their members, and for it to be sharing to be compulsory as opposed to a nice to have, and therefore affect change much more quickly, immediately, as Jeremy was saying?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the organiser for inviting me, and I'm pleased to be part of this event today. Just before I go on to that point, I think I just want to kind of recognise the fact that, there's kind of two main responses to the climate change: the adaptation and the mitigation. And as a cruise line and as an industry, we're very focused on the mitigation, how we're going to enable this transition away from a dependence on fossil fuels, supporting the industry and reducing impacts that we have through efficiency, technical innovation on our ships, and so on. But despite that, we are very well aware of the need to support adaptation and to support destinations, particularly those with a significant tourism dependency from a social and economic perspective. And you're right, I mean, it is important that we work with our industry bodies and with others. I believe that the ones that we work with, for example, CLEAR is a key one we work with, as you mentioned, the Cruise Line Association, and we work with them with some of our key destinations, looking at how best we can support them, because of course it's in our interest to do that. Just some examples I can give of the kind of work we've done is working with them on the challenges of tourism numbers and supporting them in the work, particularly in recent years in Venice and Dubrovnik. CLEAR really took a strong industry kind of position and represented us and other cruise lines in understanding what we could do to help support the efforts of these destinations. And it was aspects such as understanding and complying with scheduling changes, limitations on visitor numbers during certain periods, supporting efforts for better visitor flow, and also supporting efforts for decentralizing excursions, supporting destinations in having strong activities that the visitors would engage in that would take them away from the key tourism destinations. It was particularly important for Dubrovnik for the visitor numbers because, you know, as you're probably aware, it was compromising its status as a UNESCO site. I want to pick up on a point I think that was made earlier. I think it's by Pascal about making sure that we work with these associations in a way that make sure that we're not kind of reinventing the wheel, because there's a lot of work going on. We're also working with the WTTC, the World Travel and Tourism Council. They've set up a sustainability committee and a sustainability task force, and I believe that is going to be very action focused. You know, we're working on identifying particular destinations and working with all the partners we need to work with to try and develop particular projects in those places and how we can actually support them. This collaboration is absolutely fundamental. You know, trade associations do provide a great platform for that, representing the industry, working together to address these specific needs relating to climate change. So I think we do work to push the associations that we're in to look for very real and tangible support that we can provide.
Mafalda, you've got direct experience. Thank you, Linden. Sorry, you have direct experience of working partnerships. Have you got best practice that you can share on exactly the kind of issues that Linden's just talked about? Are you on mute again? Just a hunch.
You won't believe me, but I unmute myself, and then suddenly I get muted again. So please do not mute me, someone. Claire, I just think that it's just so important to do exactly what Linden was mentioning, and these collaboration working towards the same goals. I mean, it's all about goal 17. The Sustainable Development Goal 17 is about partnerships. It really is the goal that just brings all of the other goals together. And we're lucky because the tourism industry is one of the few, if not the only industry that can actually work towards moving the needle and advancing the goals as a whole. So 17 and partnerships is definitely key. Everybody working together and best practice at all levels.
Yeah, I mean, isn't one of the problems that we don't just have to act now on the problems we've got, but also manage, we've got to learn to anticipate the ones that are around the corner. So we need to manage new climatic excesses in order to maintain tourism activity in current areas, but also we need to create risk management strategies and deploy those capabilities. I mean, Raj, have you got any thoughts on how best the industry can approach this?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I think, you know, it's really we need to really work together, and I think that's where I think Mafalda has also been talking about that, and I think that comes out really strongly out here that needs to be done. You'll have classic problems like if I look at my country in Nepal, the government talks in numbers, and the industry is talking in trying in a local community would be trying and control to do the right thing, and it just doesn't match. So unless all of the actors come together in thinking in the same way, you'll always have a problem, and the clash will always be there. So really, I think the important thing out there is to actually get all the actors together. And tourism really is quite powerful in having the capability to do that. And there are countries around the world where things are happening in the right direction. For example, Bhutan is moving from is controlling its tourism. It is going into carbon neutral, in fact, carbon negative. I've been working in Rwanda, which is also trying to do the same thing. They've moved from just looking at thinking about mass and getting more tourism to slightly high-end tourism, but also moving towards agro and trying to get more of the tourism money spread out. So all of these things are happening, especially when there is a will right at the top. And tourism generally, because it is about opening borders and getting people in, and it's about the economy. There's the government side of it is a very important part, and then of course the industry part of it comes in. And I, for one, with the countries that I work with, the industry associations just don't understand that. You talk about SDG to them, they'll be like, what is that? And so we really need to get that education in and get those systems in. And once we achieve that sort of thing, and I think at the destination level, we can really start moving ahead many steps, And in a conference like Evora, when all of these actors are coming together, it's an opportunity to try and get that thing done.
Well, the actors are all coming together, aren't they? But there is another really important part of the equation in this, and that's the consumer. My daily focus, our readers, your customers, and they have a part to play in this, a massive part. Jeremy, how do you apportion responsibility to consumers? Because people don't like being told what to do they? And they especially don't like to have to think about something like responsibility when holidays and trips are meant to be about absolving themselves of responsibility. So how do we engage them in this immediate battle that we're facing?
I think the way you described it there, Claire, is exactly the sort of nub of it, that people don't want to think about such things when they're going on holiday. And my God, and with the level of restriction of going on holiday we've all had in the last year and a half, that's going to be all the more so.
Yeah.
But I do think we have to be very careful about how we approach the idea of apportioning responsibility to the tourist, the traveller, the consumer. We design the products, we create and manage the supply chains, we profit from the business. It's our decisions as an industry that choose the direction that our industry goes in. And too often we have tended to say, when the consumer demand is there, we will deliver it. But there's not leadership, and we want to talk of ourselves as an industry leading, and therefore we have to lead. And we have an absolutely unique, because of the nature of the industry that we have this totally unique ability to engage with people who are not at work, people who are relaxed, who are open to new experiences and discoveries, and show them how enriching holidays that we have designed and built sensitively, that do all the things we're talking about, can be, that how they can have a better time when the community actually genuinely wants them there. When the person showing them round the national park truly understands the complexity of the biodiversity and can give them a better experience. And the trouble is that, and I come at this as someone who spends a lot of his time working in communications, too often our communications doesn't do that. It doesn't connect. We print out lists of how to be a responsible tourist and sort of leave them on the bed at the hotel, and they're, don't do this, do that, don't touch that, don't buy this, and they're restrictions when people are absolutely looking not to be restricted. And if we can, and there are needs for restrictions. I'm not about to say we shouldn't have restrictions, but if we can look to try to frame the opportunity to connect to biodiversity, just the sort of stuff I was talking about in my first answer, to connect to communities in ways that are real and authentic, as giving you a better holiday, then maybe we'll get closer to the tourist rather than too much of the idea that it's their responsibility to make the right choice.
Yeah. Thank you. Linden, so, you're actively involved in this. How are you impressing the importance of responsible tourism on your guests and affecting their behaviour without reducing the desirability of the very thing they want to do? I mean, even making sustainability sexy. How are you doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jeremy's kind of covered some of these points. A holiday is a time to relax, forget about your troubles. And we do need to find ways that we can kind of educate and influence in a way that doesn't compromise that. I mean, I think there's certain things that have been in place now for a number of years, and it's taken as a kind of given, and we're a floating hotel, and we take many of the measures that hotels take, asking guests to hang up their towels if they're comfortable to use them again, removing plastic, single-use plastic. So there are certain things that are now not seen as a compromise, but taken as a given. And I think we will see a shift towards a more discerning attitude towards travel, as potentially as the climate change impacts become more tangible. We can use the time on board to educate, you're right, but it does have to be matched with the change. We can educate on the destinations if we have the information to do that. As Jeremy said, it's not just a case of just leaving some general messages on a sheet of paper on the bed. It's about saying before we go to a destination, talking about, just for example, this destination you're going to has invested an awful lot in recycling infrastructure, for example. And all the kind of things they've done, and make it into a really strong story as to why you'd want to then go to that particular destination and support, because that the effort that's been put in by that destination. We worked very hard when we started putting our ships back to operation to work with the destinations to say, what kind of offerings can we give our guests, given the situation we have now, given that we need to go away from any busy places. Of course, a lot of places are quite quiet anyway, but take them off the beaten track. And, it took a bit of effort to kind of even get the tour operators and the destinations engaged with going places that we weren't used to going. And in fact, we had massively positive reactions from people who were able to see the back streets, some of the less well-trodden paths, So I think it's something that we need to do more, maybe to do that education, but we also need to know what we can educate about and
Sure.
what kind of experiences we can provide.
Absolutely. Mafalda, on that, so in terms of mid-term planning, how can we as an industry map the areas that will be negatively or positively affected, and by strengthening tourism planning and management capabilities?
I mean, I've been repeating myself a little bit this evening, but, really education is key, and we've all been talking about it, and it is so important to diffuse the right information, but also without creating too much negativity and anxiety, like the ICC report has created, or at least I believe so. But what can the industry do, right? I cannot talk on behalf of the operators and ministries, but everyone definitely needs to be more adaptable to change. Some tours to glaciers are taking an extra day now, as it takes longer because they're melting. I mean, Lewis Pugh just swam multi-day. I think it was 12 days, a swim in Greenland to raise awareness for this. The ice sheets are melting 13 meters a day. That's insane, right? So you need to add an extra day to the trip. And when you go to Switzerland or to the Alps in the winter and you expect snow, and there's no snow. So, the offer needs to include either hiking or bringing things back to the roots, gastronomy, learn how to make cheese. And I don't know. I do think that the industry needs to be creative, people need to have a backup plan, and we just need to continuously adapt. And there's definitely a need for a call to action. And Claire, you're there on the ground, and I hope that you don't leave until you see some sort of serious commitment, because there's been a lot that's been said throughout the day.
I kind of hope that too.
and more that will be said tomorrow. And let's hold them responsible. We, media, everybody. Let's make sure that there is action being taken.
Sure. Jeremy, we touched on those long-term backup plans earlier when you spoke. You talked about the need for about seasons changing, for example. The Med is no longer that summer destination that it was just a few years ago. Was there anything you wanted to add to that, or do you feel that we've covered that?
I think we might have covered that, but I think I'd love to just pick up on exactly what Mafalda was saying there, because I think the two things that have come through in this conversation, first of all, was many people, all of us, talking of the need for coordination, for partnership, for working together. And then what Mafalda particularly turned into there was the call to action, the need for action. Yeah. And, how do we come together in the context of climate change, the climate emergency, the climate crisis, and how do we find a role that ensures our success? And I'm going to give us a chance. It's COP26 in a few weeks' time. That's the climate conference taking place in Glasgow. It's the largest global climate moment since Paris. We use Paris as to define the moment in time when we sort of got together and did something. Well, it happens again in Glasgow in early November, and there've been huge amounts of things going on in the industry. I've been involved in a lot of them in behalf of Tourism Declares, and next week we'll see the publication or the opening to the public of the Glasgow Declaration for a Decade of Climate Action in Tourism, which the UNWTO, UNEP, my own organisation, Visit Scotland, Tourism Declares, and involvement from many, many others have been drafting together. And it is a call to our industry to do exactly what Mafalda was saying, a call to action, to come together and to share and collaborate and to respond in the ways that we're incredibly good at, so that we can do all the things we've been talking about. And to me, that is, we need to seize these moments. It's wonderful that this first sort of conference that is happening sort of post the summer is bringing this call together to collaborate and to act. Well, we've got an opportunity in 5 weeks' time.
Yeah, sure. We were going to go into some detail about product and how we make that how we make this attractive and how realistic those backup plans are. I think we're slightly running out of time. Linden, I know you were going to talk through your introduction of Protectors at MSc, now works for the GSTC. Raj, you were going to talk about the fact that sustainable offers have to be amazing, and I'll pick up on that in our proposal for the mandate. Pascal, you also we talked about the importance of using local products and shifting from importation to actually creating a product. Forgive me if I'm taking your words and butchering them somewhat, but if anyone wants to add anything now, please do. Forever hold your peace, and we'll move on to our suggestion for the mandate. I've literally just summed up 15 minutes of expertise in my in a subhead. But when we spoke, we last week, the panel and I, we had we had decided that this is really key, that new products really have to be good, that of course they have to be sustainable and have an environmental the environment at their very heart, but they also need to attract the consumer. As we've said, we have to create the consumer demand. We can't wait for it. And I think that's something that we can work on. That's something that's immediately implementable. And of course, as you've heard over the last 45 minutes, education, not just in terms of via the trade bodies and associations and corporations, but about the world, allowing new territories or characteristics of territories to be discovered. And I'm really stretching this one point, but in fact three, but I think we can pretend they're one, that the industry really does need to commit to immediate action. Every single panellist, I think, has made this point really strongly, that the time is now, not next week, not next month, not in Glasgow, but now, and leave this brilliant event not just talking about what needs to happen, but with tangible goals that we can action tomorrow, today. So the brilliant panel. Thank you so much to each of you for your time and the effort and the work you've put into this, which the audience won't have seen, but I did. And thank you to all of you for joining us here today. Thanks.